Hi, I'm Pastor Joseph from Culpeper Presbyterian Church.
And I'm Pastor Marilyn from Forsyth Presbyterian Church and Newkirk Campus Ministry at Mercer University. And welcome to our Lenten sermon and discussion series on the story of Joseph, found in Genesis chapters 37 through 50. While we recommend using either the Common English Bible or the New Revised Standard Version for this series, you can use any translation you like. Comparing different translations is a great way to gain greater insight into Scripture. Pastor Joseph and I will start the discussion, and then y'all will take over in your small groups or in the comments section of these videos.
Last week, we covered some introductory material, including why we think this story is important and our connections to this story as we enter into this study. Nobody starts reading Scripture from a blank slate. We all bring something with us to the text. And those perspectives help us to see different aspects of the biblical narrative. And when we read Scripture together, we get a fuller picture of who God is and what God is doing in the Bible and the world.
This week, we're jumping right into Genesis 37, looking at violence in the family of God.
Genesis chapter 37 identifies itself and the chapters that follow it as the account of Jacob's descendants. We're calling this the Joseph story because he quickly becomes the human being around whom most of the drama revolves. But from the second verse of this biblical novella, we see this as a family story, not an individual's.
And favoritism runs rampant in each generation of the family of Abraham. Jacob's generation is no different. Joseph is Jacob's 12th child, but the first child born of his favorite wife, Rachel.
The amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat of Andrew Lloyd Webber fame is a symbol of the favoritism of Joseph. In the Hebrew text, the garment is simply a tunic with sleeves, but Jacob made it for Joseph alone, singling him out among his offspring as the privileged child.
Not only does the garment mark Joseph as Jacob's favorite, but it also marks him as set aside from the labor of the rest of the family. The only other time this word is used in Hebrew scripture, this word for the garment with long sleeves, it is used to describe the garment of a princess in David's court. I think it's significant that the first time Joseph's brothers glimpse him as he's coming to find them when they're hard at work caring for the family's flocks in Dothan, that first glimpse of Joseph is of Joseph wearing this fancy and impractical garment given to them by their father. Joseph isn't responsible for what his brothers do to him, but between the outfit, the favoritism it represents, and the dreams, the narrator gives us a picture of a baby brother in a provocatively annoying teenager phase. And we begin to see why verse 4 told us the brothers could not speak shalom to him.
Joseph's dreams are an essential part of this story, both in framing the conflict within the family and in providing a window through which we can see the work of God in this story. Though hidden in the form of a dream, silent and not at all visible, the listener will understand that the dream is the unsettling work of the Lord upon which everything else depends. In the end, the dream prevails over the tensions of the family. The unfamiliar fraying of familial ties is never so great as to outstrip the Lord's power to be present with us.
Genesis says Jacob responded to Joseph's dreams by rebuking Joseph, but also by keeping the matter in mind. Remember that Jacob is also a dreamer. More than once, God has revealed God's self to Jacob and offered him reassurance and direction through dreams. It seems possible to me that Joseph's dreams intensified Jacob's favoritism. Not only is this the favorite child of the favorite wife, but this is also the only one of Jacob's children we are told share with him the gift of prophetic dreaming.
In verse 18, the violence inherent in the system goes from foreshadowed to overt. The brothers plot against Joseph. And this "here comes this dreamer" passage was used in my ordination service as a call to both hopefulness and endurance in my own ministry. We've seen in Joseph's dreams a hopeful future, but for his brothers it was a threat. In hopelessness, the brothers have resolved to kill the dream, but they cannot carry it out. The dream is stronger than their resolve.
But even though calmer, wiser heads prevail, and Joseph's brothers manage to avoid actual fratricide, however narrowly, Joseph is not out of danger. Stripped of his fancy garment, he is also stripped of his voice. Although we will learn much later that he pleaded with them and they would not listen, scripture doesn't give us those words at this time. Instead, Judah proposes the solution to keep their hands clean but remove the dreamer from the midst of them. Let's sell him. At the time, kidnapping and enslavement were viewed as one crime, what today we would call human trafficking. Significantly, the Midianite and Ishmaelite traders through whose hands the kidnapped Joseph passes are the brothers' cousins through their great grandfather Abraham. Midian was Abraham's son by his second wife Keturah, who he married after the death of Sarah, and Ishmael was Abraham's son, firstborn son, born of Hagar, Sarah's servant. So all the violence done to Joseph in chapter 37 happens to him at the hands of his family.
But the violence could have been so much worse. After all, the initial plan was to kill this dreamer, and he ends the chapter merely sold into bondage. Jacob's eldest son, Reuben, lays the groundwork for Judah's brother for sale idea by stopping his brothers from spilling Joseph's blood, proposing letting him die of exposure in the pit instead. Dr. Kathleen O'Connor, whom we have quoted before, drew a connection to a sermon by Dutch Reformed preacher named Alan Bozak. Preaching against the background of apartheid South Africa, Bozak lifts up the Reuben Option, which tries to stand up for those who would be victimized, but without exposing oneself to any risk. The Reuben Option: take a stand, but always cover yourself. The problem cannot be ignored, so let us do something about it, but always in such a way that it does not hurt us too much. Don't antagonize people too much, especially those in the church who have money. Opt for peace, but don't confuse that with justice. That's a temptation with which I sometimes struggle, to look as though I'm protecting the young Josephs of the world, but without taking a stand against violence. It might prevent death, but it also doesn't exactly preserve life in a way that is faithful and righteous.
And Joseph's life has been stolen from his family. Jacob's grief is inconsolable. And I think it's because Jacob, the trickster, knows when he's being tricked. When his sons present him with the bloody long-sleeved garment, I think Jacob doesn't buy the story that some wild animal has somehow killed his favorite son. I think he does believe Joseph is dead, but I think that he actually thinks that his other sons had a hand in Joseph's demise, and the belief that his sons have committed fratricide, is what creates within him the inconsolable grief.
Verse 36 gives us the briefest preview that Jacob's grief is not the end of the story, but the next chapter moves forward without any mention of Joseph, leaving us living with Jacob's grief as the story of his family continues to unfold.
Next time, we will look at how Joseph fares in the house of Potiphar and how sexual harassment in the workplace is not a 21st century problem.
We're going to pass things off to y'all's discussion groups or to your individual reflection so that this conversation can continue. We study Scripture together so that we can get a fuller picture of what God is doing in the text and what God is doing in the world around us.
We're entering this story together to grow as disciples. So we encourage you not to think of this video as a source of definitive answers, but as a starting point for your own exploration. We encourage you to share your questions with one another in your discussion groups, in the comment section below here, or directly with either one of us.